The topic of my presentation today is the genocide of the Assyrians in the Ottoman Empire, documentary evidence and the burden of responsibility. The Christian genocide perpetrated by the Young Turks is one of the unresolved issues of the 20th century. The descendants of the perpetrator themselves having accepted responsibility for the massacres, relying instead on a number of methods to deny that such event even took place. At the extreme end of this denialism is even alleged that Turks were the victims of genocide perpetrated by the Armenians and other Christians in the Ottoman Empire. Nonetheless, it is a well-researched and historical fact that Armenians, Greeks, Assyrians, and even Yazidis were victims of a brutal and orchestrated campaign of annihilation. The event that unfolded in 1915 not only have impacted on the victims, Greeks, Armenians, Assyrians, and Yazidis, but also Kurds and Turks and other Muslim nations are still burdened by the scale of atrocities that their forefathers have committed. Turkish historian Halil Bektay says, on this issue, Turkey is living in total, almost hermetic isolation from the rest of the world. The endless repetition that no such incident occurred, that this is a matter of groundless Armenian falsification, form a type of sweet lullaby for our public opinion. This lullaby is not putting the rest of the world to sleep, but only the Turkish public to sleep. The leading triumvirate of Ittihad ve Terakki Cemiyeti, translated as Community for Union and Progress, also known as the Young Turks, it is the group that bears the main responsibility in the massacres that was perpetrated against the Christian population in the empire. The triumvirate consists of Talat Pasha. He was a former postal worker who became an interior minister and ordered the arrest of Armenian leaders on 24th April 1915, which is a day of historical significance for Armenians. And he sent a request for the Tehcir law, which is deportation, I'll come back to that, on May 29, 1915. Which initiated large-scale genocide of the Ottoman Armenians and other Christians. Tehcir, a Turkish word, Ottoman word, means deportation. Although the Turkish historical site, this is the site of the Turkish Historical Society, calls it relocation. Now, the Red House Ottoman dictionary is very clear. Tehcir means forced to migrate from one's homeland. Even the Ottoman dictionary, the Ottoman Turkish dictionary, says that it's forced immigration, not relocation. The term relocation is a term which somewhat softens the brutality of mass deportation and the chaos that it brought. So we are talking about mass deportation, not relocation. Talat Pasha himself became a Grand Vizier in 1917. Grand Vizier is simply, in today's terms, a prime minister in the palace. He is said to have had his own telegraphic device at home. Now, the significance of that is that Talat was able to send telegrams which were not officially recorded. The U.S. ambassador in Constantinople during the war, Henry Morgenhouse, was told by Talat Pasha, our policy on the Armenian question is clear. We will not leave any part of Anatolia to Armenians. Second member of the triumvirate of the Union Ittihad ve Terakki, Society for Progress, it was Enver Pasha. He was born to a wealthy family in Istanbul and was a graduate of a war academy. In 1908, the young Turk revolution broke out in Thessaloniki, and which is now in northern Greece, and the young Enver quickly became one of its military leaders. In 1913, when the Young Turks took power for a second time, the first time was in 1908, Enver became a war minister, which was a key position, obviously. Nazim Pasha was war minister before Enver. Enver's thug, Yakup Cemil, who also took part in Armenian genocide, murdered the then war minister Nazim in his ministerial office. So you can see what kind of political party we're dealing with here. Enver was a military adventurist, and he pursued his dream of pan-Islamism, Ittihadi Islam, even after his fall from power in campaigns in the Caucasus and Central Asia. The third member of the triumvirate, Jamal Pasha, in 1911 he was the governor of Baghdad, and after the coup in 1913, where the Young Turks came back to power again, he became commander of Istanbul, and he was also appointed Minister of Public Works. In 1914 he became the Minister of Navy, although there wasn't much of a navy to speak of. But Jamal Pasha was eventually also the commander of the Fourth Army. So he was perhaps the least important member of the triumvirate, but it was just as brutal as the other two. The massacres were instigated by the deportation Tehcir law. And they were carried out by the Teşkilat-ı Makhsusa, or sometimes referred to Teşkilat-ı Makhsuse, and this is translated as a special organization, and the Kurdish militia, which were called Hamidiye Corps, or Hamidiye Alaları in Turkish, and later they were reorganized, and they were called Tribal Light Cavalry. So this is Ashursat Hafif Subay Alayları. The name change didn't really matter. Both versions of Hamidiye Alayları were just as brutal in committing massacres. Today, however, I'm only talking about the Teşkilat-ı Makhsusa, that is the special organization. In the official Turkish historiography concerning Teşkilat-ı Makhsusa, their members are presented as heroes who helped the Ottoman Empire in the First World War by instigating revolts in the Caucasus against the Russian Empire. In other words, while Armenians and Assyrians were regarded as traitors who sided with the enemy against the Ottoman Empire and thereby deserving to be deported and massacred, the treachery of the Muslim peoples in the Russian Empire is deemed to be a glorious act. This kind of a contradiction, or hypocrisy if you like, is the norm in the Turkish official historiography. Also, by emphasizing the Teşkilat-ı Makhsusa, the special organization's role in the Caucasus and in the Arab lands, their involvement in the massacres of Christian people is omitted. Enver Pasha's aide-de-camp, Arif Cemil, in his memoirs, revealed that according to Teşkilat-ı Makhsusa's regulation, or Nizamname, the Eastern Front was to operate under the name of Caucasian Independent Society, Kafkas İhtilal Cemiyeti. Much care was taken for this regulation to circulate without falling into enemy hands. The first objective of the regulation, stated in this document, that it is the instigation of a universal rebellion in Caucasus by arming various ethnic groups and thereby causing problems against Russia's military effort. These armed ethnic groups were to assist the Ottoman army when it was to invade the Caucasus region of Russia. Enver, who was fond of undercover operations and special task forces, death squads if you like, outside ordinary military command, founded in secret the Teşkilat-ı Makhsusa special organization, which became a state organ. Arif Cemil, who was as I said, aide-de-camp of Enver Pasha, so he had inside knowledge, reports that Teşkilat-ı Makhsusa was officially established after a meeting in early August 1914, and that once officially established, Süleyman Askeri Bey was appointed as the head of this new organization. Taner Akçam, a Turkish historian, states that the extant information leads us to conclude that in 1911 a group was associated with Enver Pasha, began to call itself the Special Organization. This group was initially funded to organize a guerrilla war in Libya against Italy at the end of 1911. It is probable that the organization was formally established in 1913 under the leadership of Enver Pasha and played an important role in the Balkan Wars in the summer of 1913. It was then reconstructed in January 1914 when Enver Pasha was the Minister of War. Stoddart, who American by citizenship and probably a CIA agent at the time, wrote a doctoral thesis on the Teşkilat-ı Maksusa in the late 1950s. And this is still the most comprehensive study of Teşkilat-ı Maksusa, at least in English. He was granted unprecedented access by Turkish authorities to archival material, and we are talking about 1950s, and he extensively interviewed one of the leaders of Teşkilat-ı Maksusa, Eşref Kuşçubaşı, who was still alive at the time. It was about 35 years after the event. As well as Cemal Kutay, another important person in the organization, in the special organization. It can be assumed that in return for his access, for the access that was given by Turkish authorities, Stoddart concentrates only on the organizational activities in the Arab lands and barely mentions either the economic program or the persecution of the Armenians. Also, Stoddart's key informant Kuşçubaşı operated mainly in the Arab lands and not in the Caucasus or concerning Christians. Enver Pasha sent Eşref Kuşçubaşı to supply money and command to the army in Yemen, which was cut off after a rebellion there by the governor of Mecca. It seems therefore acceptable to talk of two Teşkilat-ı Maksusas, one which was established under the order of Enver Pasha on 5th of August 1914 when it was reorganized and expanded, and one which was operated during 1913 and became instrumental in the establishment of the provisional government of Western Thrace. Cemal Pasha, which, as I said earlier, was one of the members of the governing triumvirate during Ittihad's rule, admitted in his memoirs that a semi-official Teşkilat-ı Maksusa imposed on the military headquarters and the government the principle of turning a blind eye to its activities in Western Thrace and acted as it wished on the other side of Maritsa River. Therefore, it can be surmised that Teşkilat-ı Maksusa, in its capacity acting in Western Thrace before the war, before 1914, in some kind of clandestine activity, already established a modus operandum. So it was doing special tasks. After the official establishment of Teşkilat-ı Maksusa, it was only nominally under the tutelage of the War Ministry and not under the control of the government, but very much under the personal control of Enver Pasha. This became evident in the trial of the Ittihadists, the members who perpetrated the genocide. The leaders, the triumvirate had escaped, but those that remained were tried by an Ottoman court, which upon insistence of the Allies, and some of them were only tried in absentia, as they had already escaped the country. This took place in 1919. The Ittihadists, the leading members of the government, which were caught, were unable to provide information about Teşkilat-ı Maksusa. So none of the ministers, other than, of course, the members of the triumvirs that I mentioned, had no idea how Teşkilat-ı Maksusa operated. At least even Said Halim Pasha, who was a grand vizier during a period during the Second World War, he was asked by the judge on whether or not he was informed about this organization. And he said, only when everything was over. So Stoddart notes that Eşref Kuşçubaşı has said on several occasions many of the cabinet ministers were not informed about the Teşkilat-ı Maksusa because of what he termed of their unreliability. So the leading triumvirate of the government thought many members of the government were not reliable enough to be told of the special task of the special organization. It is possible that Said Halim Pasha was being tried for crimes committed during the war, have lied at the time to protect himself, But other members of Ittihad, of the ruling party, they knew what was happening and they appalled by that. Muhittin Bilgin, a left-wing member of Ittihad Veteraki, the party Union and Progress, and also a chief auditor of the newspaper Tanin, in his account about the period, remarked that in Enver's military circle there were a number of people who were adventurous, and that other than these people there was an organization which they called Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa, undercover politicians and foreign affairs. Among them there were different types. They used discretionary funds and supported Enver. Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa coexisted with intelligence agencies of the Interior Ministry and the Directorate of General Staff, in addition to Talat and Jamal Pasha's private spy networks. According to Stoddart, at least partially money came from the discretionary funds of the War Ministry, which allowed Enver Pasha to keep a tight leash on the organization of the Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa. Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa's special budget was called Teşkilat-ı Mesture, that is to say, concealed organization. What were the activities of Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa which even its budget needed to conceal? As already stated, officially Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa was established to fight the Russian and the Arabs in special operations, as Stoddart claims, also to spread seeds of separatism in ally colonies. Other evidence proves that Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa was involved in special operations to attack and slaughter Christian populations. Mevlanzade Rifat, a journalist and a Kurdish nationalist, eyewitness of the events of 1914 and 18, of the events between 1914 and 18, reported of a secret meeting in 1914 at Nuru Osmaniye Street, close to Babali. The Babali is the suburb, the Sublime Port. It's the seat of the Ottoman government. In that suburb, in which meeting Talat Bey had invited many certain members of his party for a special meeting. The speakers in this meeting talk of necessity of removing the Armenian people in the name of salvation of the empire. So it was very clear why the meeting was called. Notably, Dr. Nazim, one of the most important members of the Ittihad, outside the three members that I've mentioned, the leading triumvirate, he rejected half measures, and in the meeting he said, if this liquidation, and I emphasize the word liquidation, is not general and definitive, will cause us troubles. It is necessary for the Armenian nation to be uprooted, that not a single Armenian remains in our soil. A provisional executive committee looking at the means most adequate for rapidly liquidating the problem was constituted by Dr. Bahattin Shakir. Mind you, both Dr. Nazim and Dr. Bahattin Shakir were doctors of medicine. Ahmet Shukru was the second member of this group, and Dr. Nazim the third. Sometimes later, Dr. Shakir suggested calling this task, the task of liquidation of the Christians, the Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa. As a former president of the Republic, Celal Bayar, in his memoirs, recalls a number of meetings were held between May to July 1914, in which, and unquote, I quote, the elimination of masses, unquote, was discussed. To further the same, Enver Pasha decided to release convicts and provide them training. Mete Tuncay claims that while conducting research on Colonel Kasap Osman, translated as Osman the Butcher, and you can leave it to your imagination to work out how he achieved such a title, he saw a copy of the provisory law dated 4 March 1915. That is, Mete Tuncay, the Turkish researcher, saw this copy of the provisory law, which, according to Mete Tuncay, enabled the release of convicts. So the convicts were released under a government decree. Celal Bayar, who was in charge of the nationalization campaign in Smyrna, or Izmir, later, quoted a report by Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa agent describing the removal of internal tumors. And by internal tumors, of course, this is a euphemism for the Christian population of the empire. Falih Rıfkı Atay, later a government official during the Ittihad rule and journalist after the establishment of the Turkish Republic, while still was a student at military school when the war started, he went to headquarters of the army to volunteer his service as a civilian. Dr. Nazim, who listened to his wish, laughed and replied, "We are looking for people in prison to set up gangs. This is not a place for a youngster like you." Leaving the headquarters, Fatih Rıfkı Atay, and mind you, who is a Turkish nationalist, was perplexed by what he called an army of murderers. So even a journalist, prominent journalist in the early years of the Turkish Republic, he was still stated his belief that Teşkilat-ı Maksusa, or what Dr. Nazim was establishing, was an army of murderers. Ahmet Refik Altınay, who was originally member of the party, Union and Progress, or Ittihad, and a senior official in the government, he was disgusted by the policies of his party and wrote a book to condemn them. Ahmet Refik says that in the beginning of the war, many gangs were sent to Anatolia from Istanbul. The gangs consisted of murderers and thieves which had been taken out of prisons. These people were trained for 1 week in the Department of Interior and were sent to Caucasus border during the efforts of the special organization. In the Armenian massacres, these gangs committed the biggest murders. Professor Halil Bektay, whom I mentioned in my introduction, who doesn't subscribe to the official thesis, the official Turkish history thesis, maintains that it was indeed the special organization that murdered the Armenians. Bektay conceded that although written documents don't talk about massacres and mass murder in the plan to expel all Armenians from Turkey, it was still understood that together with these official commands, separate, unwritten, special orders were given at the same time to the men of the special organization. So we're unlikely to ever find documents which gives orders to massacre Christians. They worshipped violence and had no social morals. That is, the members of the special organization Teşkilat-ı Maksusa. Those giving the commands did it by means of a special apparatus, the special organization. It is understood that Bahattin Shakir, which I mentioned earlier, working for Enver Cemal and Talat, and leader for the organization, he organized special death squads and volunteers in the region. So ordinary Turks and Kurds took part in this genocide. This is an issue that we'll come back to. Some of these volunteers, which were organized by the special organization, used for this purpose were convicted criminals sprung from prison and saved from the hanging noose. The event is this simple and this clear, says Bektay. Along with these people, they also made Turkish and Kurdish Muslim tribes attack the migrating convoys of Armenians. Nonetheless, Teşkilat-ı Maksusa activities were not directed only against the Armenians. Greeks as well as Assyrians have been victims of massacres perpetrated by it. David Gaunt provides numerous examples in his recent book of murders carried out by Teşkilat-ı Maksusa against the Assyrian population. And I'm reading this passage for you. In the market of Midyat, there was a place called Sakfo. I apologize if I mispronounced the word. Near the house of a West Syriac Protestant Nateko family. And there I saw how the Turkish forces killed the young Turkish boys. This is an eyewitness testimony. They would throw from the roof young boys headlong from that high building to fall down and die at once. Many Christian caravans arrived at Midyat, and they were filled with women and children. They were taken to mosque's yard. The yard would become overcrowded. To reduce number of hostages, the Turkish forces gathered the boys, around 500 to 600. They told them to lie down and face down. Then they took some thick sticks and beat them on the head. Then some 40 or 50 Turkish soldiers riding horses rode back and forth over the boys' heads until they died. Bet Shawase notes that commander of the forces is identified as Sami Bey of the Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa, who was in Midyat with a contingent of Mujahideen recruited from released convicts. One of the most notorious murderers of Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa, Topal Osman the Lame, from Giresun, acted against the Greeks, ostensibly to quash Greek rebellions in the Pontus region. In reality, he was a plain murderer. In January 1916, Topal Osman caught a group of Greek spies, allegedly Greek spies, who allegedly worked for the Russians, and handed them to the 7th Division. The Topal Osman practices even displeased the authorities. Balcıoğlu, a Turkish historian who subscribes to the official historiography, the official historical thesis that no genocide was perpetrated by the Ottomans, who told us about Topal Osman and that authorities were displeased with him, doesn't specify what type of activities that Topal Osman inflicted upon Greeks. But it can be speculated that Topal Osman excesses were evidently widely known to the point where even the government couldn't cover that up. Balcıoğlu tries to camouflage these activities by roundabout expressions so as not to tarnish the image of Topal Osman as a hero of Turkish independence war. He concludes that Topal Osman crushed the Greek gangs with rough methods. We can leave again up to our imagination to figure out what his rough means, even when it's watered down by Balcıoğlu in his account. Evidently, Topal Osman's genocidal activities cannot be concealed even in the accounts of most ardent official Turkish historiographers. Yet, other historians, such as Said Çetinoğlu, who are not constrained by the official thesis, draw the conclusion that Topal Osman, with the support of local notables and authorities, without having to face any hurdles, subjected the local population to ethnic cleansing. I have been fortunate to examine a number of documents in the Ottoman archives consisting of a collection of reports concerning the expenditure for prison restorations in 1914 and 1915 in the jails of Mardin, Midyat, Cizre, Nusaybin, Savur and Diyarbakir, which are all areas of the traditional Assyrian homeland. These documents discuss budgetary issues and detail of the repair work undertaken. We learned that the prison budget was transferred from the Finance Ministry to the Department of the Interior, which is perhaps more appropriate in a time of war. Notably, the documents raise a pertinent question. Why would the Ittihad government, why would the government of the day embark upon restorations of prison in 1915 while there was the war was in full force and surely the expenditure was required elsewhere? It can be speculated with some degree of certainty, given the context described earlier in this paper. The prison restoration program created the pretext for emptying prisons and releasing convicts. It is the last document in this collection which is the most intriguing. It is sent by the province of Diyarbakir, the governor of Diyarbakir, to the Department of Interior. And the governor says to the Department of Interior, "Your Excellency, a piece of inspection schedule of June 1915 has been presented through a memorandum from the General Court of Appeal about Central Provincial Prison. As shown in the detailed inventory above, it is inventory which is described in the memorandum. During the month of June of the current year, 83 people were in prison because of treason and 13 because of misdemeanors in the central prison. Now, in the prison inspection report that has been presented, continues the governor, it has been understood that from the 174 prisoners of the current year, 80 were in prison of treason and 13 due to misdemeanors, he repeats. Now, the interesting sentence in this otherwise perhaps routine report is that it says, from those sentenced in 1914, 28 are in the interrogation department and the remaining 47 in hand, which is a term in the Ottoman which also can be translated at hand, available, or ready. I think, given the context, I think we understand what they are available for. As Ittihad Secret Army, as Eric John Zucher calls it, I think is a Swiss historian, the Teşkilat-ı Muhsusa recruited disparate elements, including soldiers, gendarmes, thugs, murderers, thieves, adventurers, as well as ideologues. They were organized in 4 types of groups. In current and former convicts, the able-bodied formed their military detachment. For example, Yaqub Cemil, I mentioned to you earlier, was the thug who killed the war minister, Nazım, so that Enver Pasha can become a war minister in his lieu. The second group was Mevlevi and Bektashi religious order group. So it sounds strange, but even religious groups such as Mevlevi and Bektashi form part of this organization. Then there were the volunteers groups consisting of certain ethnic groups, Kurds, Circassians, Druzus and Lazars. And there were also the irregular groups, brigands, or çeteciler as it's called. For example, the gang of Yaqub, the gang of Topal Osman the Lame, which I mentioned earlier, the gang of Maksut, the gang of Veysel Bey and others. Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa started to execute parts of the Ittihad's plan to exterminate Christian masses before its official establishment date of August 1914. For example, on 25th June 1914, the Danish consul in Izmir, reported to his government about disorders in the vilayet, that is the province of Aydın in the Aegean region. And he states, the bands of Başıbozuks, Başıbozuks means irregular group, literally translates as the head is kaput, so it basically consists of mad people who know no boundaries. The bands of Başıbozuk, says the Danish consuls, had gone south to Menemen, is a suburb in Izmir, and after looting all the villages on their way, attacked Focia on the night of the 12th of June on 3 sides, and ably assisted by the Cretans. Cretans are Muslim refugees from Crete who work at the salt depot, soon turned into a shambles. Quoting from the words of an eyewitness, says the consul, within a quarter of an hour after the assault had begun, every boat in the place was full of people trying to get away. And when no more boats could have the inhabitants, the inhabitants sought refuge on the little peninsula on which the lighthouse stands. I saw 11 bodies of men and women lying dead on the shore. How many were killed, I couldn't say, but trying to get into a house of which the door stood ajar, I saw 2 dead bodies lying in the entrance hall. Every shop in the place was looted, and the goods that couldn't be carried away were wantonly destroyed. It is evident that the consul is referring in his letter, the gangs that he is referring are those organized by the Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa. The consul called these gangs Başıbozuks, being aware of the tradition of Başıbozuks in the Ottoman Empire, And according to Matthias Bjørnlund, a Danish researcher, the consul knew that these attacks were financed and run by the state. Başıbozuk were irregular troops, and they, as I said, literally translate as the head is kaput, which clearly indicates the nature of these irregular troops used by the Ottomans. Evidence from Hellenic sources indicate that these gangs operated already in 1913, attacking Greeks in Western Thrace and in Western Anatolia. Many massacres were carried out in Eastern Anatolia as well by various gangs of Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa, one which operated under the leadership of a brutal thug named Çerkez Ahmet, or Ahmet the Circassian. Rafael de Nogales, a Venezuelan mercenary, it's quite interesting actually, a Venezuelan mercenary serving in the Ottoman army, who rose to quite high rank within the army. He had first-hand experience of the massacres against Armenians, and he knew Çerkez Ahmet, so Ahmet Circassian, and his modus operandum. And he recalled that Cevdet Pasha, governor of Van, ordered Çerkez Ahmet to make a raid with his bandits upon the surrounding hamlets, wherein, let me say in passing, only women and children remained, say Nogales in his book 4 Years Beneath of Crescent. I shall not go into detail as to what Çerkez Ahmet did with those unhappy creatures, says Nogales. Suffice it to say that Cevdet himself felt obliged to reprimand his agent, whether sincerely or not, and that the very Kurds were appalled by his fiendishness. By the way, according to Nogales, Rafael de Nogales, the governor of Diyarbakir, intimidated to him that Talat, one of the leaders of the triumvirate, sent him a telegram with only 3 words on it: yak, vur, öldür, which means burn, strike, and kill. There is no copy of this telegram, and it's disputed, of course, by Ottoman sources that such telegram existed. But Rafael Nogales had no reason to lie. He was in the Ottoman army, so he was also have to bear some responsibility for what happened, and he is quite honest in his account of what happened during his years in the Ottoman Empire. So, burn, strike, and kill. The governor of Diyarbakir, who received this telegram, he knew what it was about. Ali Fuat Ender, Cemal Pasha's chief of staff during the period when he was the commander of the 4th Army, reported that a telegram arrived from provincial administration of Aleppo, which read, "Today the bandits Halil and Çerkez Ahmet Bey visited me. They told me the business of killings were completed in Diyarbakir, and now they came to do the same in Syria." No one was more enthusiastic implementing the centrally taking decisions to deport and eliminate Christians than the Vali, or the governor of Diyarbakir, Dr. Reşit Şahin Giranşiray. And it's quite important to point out this is the 3rd medical doctor that I've mentioned in my paper who participated either as ideologues or even in special tasks in the elimination of Christian masses. He was Circassian, a member of Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa. Reşit was in charge of operations in the East and in Iraq on behalf of the organization. He first worked with, he had no official title, but later became Vali of Diyarbakir, governor of Diyarbakir, and carried out the task of deportation of Armenians. Uğur Güngör, a researcher, notes that in the summer of 1915, all Christian communities of Diyarbakir were equally struck by the genocide, although the Armenians were often particularly singled out for immediate destruction. As well as being for massacres against the Armenians and the Assyrians, Reşit Şahin Giranşiray also murdered a number of Turkish officials who refused to carry out his orders. The Vali of Basra, Ferit, the Mutasharif of Muntefek Bedi Nuri, and the Kaimakam of Lige Hussein, the Deputy Kaimakam of Beshri Sabit, journalist Ismail Mestan, all socialists and all humanists were killed by Shahin Giranshrai for not obeying his orders to eliminate Christians. According to Abidin Nasibi, who is the son of the Kaimakam of Lige, Kaimakam is a term which can be translated as a kind of sub-governor, he said in his memoirs that Rashid established a mobile gendarme unit composed of Circassians and used them as a strike force. Nessim's information is based on first-hand account of Dr. Fakhri Kutlar, another medical doctor, who was a member of Teshkilat Makhsusa. Nesimi's research led him to conclude that this group of people, meaning the Teshkilat Makhsusa in Diyarbakir, consisted of pillagers and plunderers. That is, this is why this group couldn't carry out deportation but turned them into massacres. Jacques Retore, a Dominican priest who eyewitnessed the events taking place in the province of Diyarbakir, recalled that the valley preceding Rashid Bey, that's the valley before Rashid Bey was appointed, he was a conciliatory man. Hamdi Bey was not prejudiced against the Christians, but in February of 1915 he was substituted by Rashid Pasha. This appointment points to government culpability in massacres that took place in Diyarbakir, and this is in region where thousands of Assyrians lived. Indeed, the government appointed one of its own, whose disposition was one that suited the plans of Ittihad. Rashid Bey not only murdered a lot of Christians, he also amassed a fortune by robbing Armenians and Assyrians of their possessions and transferred them into his custody. Rashid Bey, says Jacques Retore, came to Diyarbakir with a very modest train, and after 1 year left his post to Ankara, accompanied with 24 full cars of gold, of precious objects, carpets, furniture of value, which he had stolen from the Armenians. After his fall from grace, Rashid penned a diatribe to defend against charges against him, that he massacred Armenians and then he plundered their property, that he also arranged for the murders of Kaimakam Lige and Beshiri and another Turkish official who didn't follow his orders. In his book, he concocted a story that Hussein Bey and Sabri Bey were murdered by Armenians. So this tradition of blaming the victims for their predicament is one that can be found in the official Turkish historiography over and over again. It has been documented in this paper. There is no shortage of first-hand accounts concerning Teshkilat Makhsusa's activities. The lack of original documentation, as far as Teshkilat Makhsusa's records are concerned, is not any impediment to trace its drudgery. The presiding judge in the trial of the Young Turks in 1919 pointed out that many original documents have been destroyed. This is during the trials of the Young Turks by the Ottoman court. The judge was referring to Teshkilat Makhsusa documents. However, this is also true for documents produced during the period in question. In some instances, the destruction of the documents were requested by the headquarters. This is a cipher from the Ottoman archives. It's sent from the Department of the Interior to the director and the director of settlement of trials of immigrants, and is sent to the provinces of Adana, Halep, Diyarbakir, Erzurum, Bitlis, Van, Trabzon, Sivas, Hudavendigar, Mosul, Edirne, and a number of mutasarifates. And it says, concerning the distribution of children who lost their guardians during the transportation of the Armenians, which then a section is illegible, we can't read it, but the sentence after that is important. The destruction of this cipher after its requisite manifestation is being communicated by circular. So we can't find documents because not only a lot of them were lost because there was a war on, but where a lot of them were destroyed because the order was not only to read the and to carry out the order, but also to destroy it. And Ittihad leaders made further efforts to destroy any evidence of their atrocities. On the 13th September of 1915, Jamal Pasha ordered residents of Aleppo to return any photographs which may have taken by the engineers or other officers of the Baghdad Railway Construction Company relating to the convoys of Armenians, together with the negatives, to the military commissariat of the Baghdad Railway at Aleppo, and warned that any contravention of this order will be punished by court-martial. So a concentrated effort here to destroy documents very early in the war, during the First World War. Despite the better efforts of the organization, some incriminating evidence still survived and was tendered as evidence in the 1919 trials. One of the most telling of these documents is a cipher sent by Dr. Bahattin Shakir of Teshkilat Makhsusa to Dr. Nazim through Sabit Bey, the governor of Harput. And it reads, "Are the Armenians who were sent there being liquidated? Are the destructive people about whom you inform me that they have been driven out and plundered being destroyed? Are they only being driven out? Let me know clearly, my brother." So this document clearly show the orders that were given to the provincial authorities by the Ottoman leadership. Ittihad Veteraki had set a goal for ethnic cleansing. That's very clear. Its plan was put into practice very early during its rule, perhaps as early as 1909. The Young Turks came to power in 1908. There was a short-lived Young Turk spring, which all ethnic groups, all nationalities believed that a new era was dawning, but this was they only lasted until 1909. The ethnic cleansing campaign became in earnest when the semi-official Teshkilat Makhsusa and band of Basibozuks were allowed to operate alongside the army and intimidate local Christians. The campaign became more systematic and massive with the official establishment of the special organization and its manning with released as well as former convicts, thugs, and ordinary murderers such as Ahmed the Circassian, Cherkez Ahmed, which I mentioned. Under the leadership of Enver Pasha, Teshkilat Makhsusa massacred the local Christian population, Greeks, Assyrians, and Armenians alike. Topal Osman, who later was recruited to Mustafa Kemal's campaign, the founder of the Turkish Republic, terrorized the Greek population in Pontus. The Valley of Diyarbakir, as I mentioned earlier, facilitated the massacres of many Armenians and Assyrians, as well as Greeks. Cherkez Ahmed the Circassian, killed many Armenians and even bragged about it to Ahmed Refik Altinay, who in turn was appalled by what Cherkez Ahmed was telling him. Ömer Naci Bey, a member of Teshkilat Makhsusa, attacked Assyrians of Azak or Hezak with his death squad. In the name of the well, I mentioned some names, but the name of Turkish functionaries, officers, and band leaders who were involved in Teshkilat Makhsusa are far too many to be enumerated in this paper. Only the most infamous ones have been superficially discussed. It is important to note, however, that today many of these people are treated as heroes in Turkey, and their activities are still being concealed in Turkish historiography. At best, fallaciously, the extensive massacres are justified on the grounds that the Ottomans were defending themselves. This approach is just as vile and reprehensible. I beg your pardon. This approach is just as vile and reprehensible as the crime of genocide itself. Now, let us look some evidence concerning Assyrians. German diplomats knew that it wasn't only the Armenians which were subjected to massacres. The German consul in Aleppo, Ressler, in a report on 27 September 1915 to the ambassador Langenburg, who was in Constantinople on a special mission, stated that, as I explained in my report of 3 September, more evidence has been found that the measures taken for the Armenians in eastern provinces are being applied to other Christians as well. In the same report, the consul informs that around Mardin, 13,000 Assyrians have been killed. And this is 27 September 1915. The consul Ressler, in another letter, straight to the Chancellor of Germany, the Prime Minister, Hollweg, on 3rd of September 1915, he stated that from the eastern provinces, it wasn't only the Armenians that have been deported, but also the Nestorians, the Syriac Orthodox, the Syrian Catholics, but other Christians as well. So basically what the good diplomat, the good consul is saying is not just the Armenians that have been deported, it was also the Assyrians by its various names. One of the most quoted books concerning the Armenian genocide, the Blue Book by James Bryce and Arnold Toynbee, originally was titled The Treatment of the Armenians and Assyrians in the Ottoman Empire. Then unfortunately the title had become The Treatment of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, but about 1/3 of the book is about Assyrians and atrocities against them. According to a study which was based on information provided by eyewitness Father Ishak Armalto, on April 1915, the governor of Diyarbakir, by now you're familiar with his name, he sent his emissary Reshid Zulfi to Cizre to incite Kurds to kill the Christians of the region. The Chaldean bishop Yaqub visited Reshid Zulfi, that special emissary, and he was told that the days we will make you to carry barley like donkeys are approaching. So the official emissary is clearly telling a Christian leader of their intent. According to Jacques Rétoré, with the Dominican priest who was in Diyarbakir, 5,600 Syrian Catholics were killed in Diyarbakir. 12,120 Chaldeans were killed in Diyarbakir, and 84,727 Syriac Orthodox. Major Noel is an English major who was on a special mission. He stated that more than 100,000 Assyrians were killed in Diyarbakir. The Assyro-Chaldean delegation in Paris put the number of the deaths to 250,000. That is the deaths of Assyrians. The point here is, irrespective of whether the numbers are accurate, is that there was a systematic extermination of Assyrians as well as Armenians. Deportation affected Assyrians as well. There is sufficient documentation to prove that. A telegram sent to the governors in the provinces of Van, Mosul, Diyarbakir, Mamure Aziz, today is Elazığ in Turkey, Aleppo and Bitlis, talks about the position of the Nestorians in the empire being very doubtful, and talks about their disposition, the alleged disposition, to be influenced by foreigners and become a channel and an instrument of foreigners. So in this telegram, deportation of Nestorian Assyrians is also ordered in such manner that they will not be together in a mass. So basically dispersing Nestorians so that they're no longer a majority in any part of the empire. Similar documents show that other Assyrian denominations, be it Nestorian, Chaldean, or Syriac Orthodox or Syriac Catholic, have been affected by the turmoil of deportation. Although the telegrams make no mention of the massacres, a telegram on the 7th of October 1915 acknowledges that many villages around Mardin, Midyat and Diyarbakir were empty. No doubt these villages were once populated by Assyrians. The term used in the telegram, deserted, somewhat masks the turmoil that preceded. The Christian inhabitants of the deserted villages were either massacred or had to flee to avoid the fate decided by the Young Turks. The government, having caused the evacuation of the villages through physical elimination, then sought to repopulate villages with Turks from the Balkans, inevitably altering the ethnic makeup of the region, which is the very essence of ethnic cleansing. After the war, religious and political leaders of the Assyrians tried to tell the world it wasn't that just the Armenians that perished. The Archbishop of the Syrian Orthodox Church, Severius Barsaum, Patriarch of Antioch, sent 2 letters to the British government and a memorandum to the League of Nations, and in it included statistics of damage to churches as well as other buildings and loss of people between 1915 and 1918. The Chaldean Patriarch Joseph Emmanuel Thomas, in his report of 29 February 19 to the French consul in Mesopotamia, listed details of massacres concerning his flock. In his report, the Chaldean Patriarch included information of victims, local chieftains and agents implicated in the massacres, particularly in the Jaziri bishopric of the Chaldeans, which belonged to Diyarbakir. 5,000 were killed, and while in the Siirt bishopric, which is further in the north, 4,000 were killed. The bishopric of Siirt was completely destroyed, all the churches and 36 villages in total. The Assyrians, before the conference of Conference of Peace at Paris in 1919, they stated thus that during the so-called Armenian massacre and exile, fully 175,000 Assyrians perished and were listed under the Armenian atrocities. So the Assyrian leaders, be it political or religious leaders of the time, made an effort after the war to make the world aware the calamity that befell upon the Assyrian population. I'd say to no avail, unfortunately. Now, that brings us to the issue of responsibility, which was partially the title of my talk. Haralambidis, a Greek researcher, states that the modern Turkish state cannot claim any historical discontinuity with the Ottoman state in order to absolve itself from the responsibility and the Young Turks movement. For neither the territorial losses it has undergone nor the new political structure it has created are of such nature to question its continuity with the previous regime. Talat Pasha's name is given to a thoroughfare in Ankara, the capital of the Turkish Republic, and Turkish schools are named after him. In 1996, Enver Pasha's remains were brought from Tajikistan. 74 years after his death, these remains were laid next to Talat Pasha and other leaders from the Union and Progress, the Ittihad Party, and they were laid to rest in the Mountain of Eternal Freedom, in Turkish, Hürriyeti Edebiye Tepesi, in Istanbul. Even the name is in Ottoman Turkish rather than in the more simplified modern Turkish. On August the 4th, 1996, in a ceremony, Süleyman Demirel, the then Prime Minister, ministers, an extreme nationalist from Ülkü Ocakları, otherwise known as idealist Hearth, took part in this ceremony. Thus, any attempt to disassociate the Republic from the Ittihad, that's the party which perpetrated the massacres, would be disingenuous. If the Turkish Republic had viewed Ottoman history from a courageous and realistic perspective, says Inci Hemikoğlu from Turkey, and it had criticized it, it would have inherited an acceptable cultural heritage, and at the same time it would have distanced itself from the past, something that it didn't do. Mustafa Kemal, later Atatürk, the founder of the Turkish Republic, did not participate in the Armenian massacres, although Stoddart, in his thesis, documents that Mustafa Kemal was a member of Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa. This is the only source in which Mustafa Kemal is reputed to be a member of special organization. However, Mustafa Kemal's views about the Armenian genocide were a bit ambivalent. In 1926, in an interview to Los Angeles Examiner, referring to a conspiracy by the former Young Turks against him, he repeated to have said, I will slaughter them all and exterminate all members of the Union. That was the party which its policies resulted in the death and displacement of 1 million Christians. Again, this statement of Atatürk in 1926 to Los Angeles Examiner is being disputed by Turkish historians. Nonetheless, the article is there. It is also repeated that Mustafa Kemal had made a submission to the trials in 1919 and blaming Ittihad for massacres perpetrated against Armenians. Yet, in 1920, in a secret sitting of a newly established assembly, the parliament in Ankara, Mustafa Kemal said, the aim of the Armenians was to annihilate the Muslim. In 1923, Atatürk, Mustafa Kemal, in a speech that he gave to Adana's artisans, he said, Armenians have no rights in this enlightened nation. The country is yours, it belongs to the Turks. Many members of the Ittihad party later became also members of Kemal's cabinet and received high offices in the Republic. Shukru Kaya, for example, who was Minister for the Interior, was originally in the Ittihad's government as General Director for Settlement of Tribes and Immigrants. There are other names such as Mustafa Abdulhakir Renda, who served as Finance, Education, Defense Ministers, as well as Speaker of the Parliament. In 1915, when the massacres were taking place, this man was a governor of Bitlis and later Aleppo. The Turkish Republic is the inescapable conclusion that is inextricably linked to the Young Turks ideologically. And many of the leaders were functionaries, were venerated, and continue to be venerated in Turkey. One slight example of Atatürk's attitude toward Assyrians is this document, decree by the government, in which insults the Syriac Orthodox Patriarch Elias by not referring to his title at all, and later strips him of Turkish citizenship as well. Now, many Muslim nations participated in the massacres. I already listed Turks, Kurds, Lazars, and Circassians. To this, the Arabs and the Persians should be added, as they attacked Assyrians in Salmas and Urmia. Just when you think the list it couldn't possibly include other nations, it does. An Armenian survivor I interviewed, Mr. Manuel Kerkesharian, told me that his convoy was attacked by Chechens on the way to Aleppo. In fact, he was angrier with Chechens than Turks. Now, the Turkish word in Chechen is the same in English, Chechen, but the word for Circassian is Cherkes, so there's some similarity in Turkish between the word Cherkes and Chechen, and I assumed he meant Circassians, not Chechens. I never heard of Chechens in that part of the world before. But a Turkish author, Baskın Orhan, who published Kerkesharian's biography, also thought that he was attacked by Circassians, not Chechens. However, recently I came across to a paper by Armenian researcher Ara Sefarian, in which he includes the testimony of an Assyrian who said that some Chechens near Rasulain attacked convoys of Armenian refugees. It appears that around the area mentioned, Rasulain, they were Chechens. So it appears, Mr. Kekesharian was right to name them in his testimony, and we were wrong. And only this year, Turkish researcher Oktay Özal, in a conference in Tbilisi, in the capital of Georgia, said that the Muslim Georgians participated in mass killings of Armenians and Greeks in the Ottoman Empire. However, while there was mass participation of Muslim nations, which I enumerated, I listed in my talk, it has to be remembered that many ordinary Muslims, many righteous, I should say, Muslims helped Christians, and many government administrators and functionaries refused to follow orders. Sister Issa Varena from the Dominican Sisterhood of Saint Catherine de Sienne, or the Catherinettes as they're known, wrote that the Kaimakam of Savur, Ahmed of Savur, Vahabi Effendi, protected her and her niece and 200 other Christians by giving them refuge in his property. As I mentioned earlier, the Vali of Basra, Ferit, the Mutasharif of Muntefek, Pedi Nuri, Kaimakam of Lija Hussein, the deputy Kaimakam of Bishiri Sabir were assassinated for not following orders to massacre Christians. Dr. Rashid also tried to assassinate the Mutasarrif of Mardin, who was removed from office. His successor was also removed for not following orders. Another example is the Kaimakam of Rasulain, and this is a cipher from the Babali, which is the seat of the Ottoman government, so it's from the government itself, to the Mutasarrifate of Zor, and it says, a number of deserters from the army and comitages from Sivrek and Viranshahir found refuge in the district of Rasulain, and the Kaimakam is protecting them, and so much so that in the district, the Diyarbakir province was informed that the Kaimakam arrested the gendarme who came to pursue about 200 deserters. While it's necessary to pursue and punish these people, wherever they may be, the Kaimakam is unable to comprehend this obligation and on the contrary, favors them without the existence of the compelling responsibility. So basically, the Kaimakam of Rasulain is condemned by the Ottoman government for not being enthusiastic follower of the decree to kill Christians. Garo Sassouni, an Armenian, also noted that Kurds in the south participated to a lesser extent by many Kurdish tribes, and only, but also helped Armenians to hide them. So it makes a differentiation between the Kurds of south and the north, and also gives the example that in Dersim, 20,000 Armenians were saved because of Kurdish efforts. And Hago Parsenyan is another eyewitness which I interviewed in the early 90s. Sadly, both Mr. Kekesharian and Arsenyan have passed since then. He told me that he had a scar, a tattoo on his right hand, which depicted an Arab knife, or hancher in Turkish, the Islamic crescent, and a star, and a spider. Now, he thinks that these tattoos were to disguise Armenians as Muslims, and were done by local Muslims, mainly Arabs, in order to save them. The fact that there were administrators who didn't follow orders, the fact that there were ordinary people who didn't join in the massacres and didn't partake in the loot that it ensued, burdens even more those who did. The Turkish nation today should be proud of people who didn't follow orders, not those who did. In conclusion, I think it's very important that the past injustices against Assyrians are recognized worldwide, and that by the descendants of the perpetrators themselves. Only then the martyrs of this aggression would rest in peace. The atrocities committed against the Assyrians and indeed the Armenians in 1915 were not acts of individual crimes. Rather, they were deliberate acts of the Ottoman government of the Young Turks, which was carrying out a policy that called for total annihilation of all Christians within the borders of the Ottoman Empire. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present the full speech.